On some nights, we lie still in the darkness, our bodies weary, minds tangled, and we long for something simple, peace. Not necessarily understanding everything, not needing to win or lose, not requiring a reason, just stillness. But true stillness is hard to find. Our minds, like lakes in a storm, ripple with thoughts, worries, memories, and desires. So tonight, if you too need such stillness, let these Zen stories guide you home to yourself, not through doctrine, not through rigid lessons, just small stories that hold within them a universe of quiet, of letting go, of understanding and acceptance. The Zen masters in these tales do not try to lecture. They simply live, fully and deeply, so that every action, every word becomes a silent teaching. And in that wordless silence, we begin to hear ourselves clearly. You may recognize yourself in these stories, someone misunderstood, someone searching, someone quietly wanting to do good in an unconventional way. Whoever you are, wherever you are, please stay a little longer. Sit quietly, breathe softly, and listen. No need to memorize, no need to fully understand, just feel. Sometimes, just one phrase is enough to bring peace for a lifetime. Here is the first story, So What? Written in the same gentle, relatable, Zen-infused style to open the main section. In a small village nestled at the foot of a mountain, spring arrived on breezes scented with cherry blossoms and the laughter of children. There lived a man who was different, quiet, unassuming, never boasting, never competing. He simply lived with the calm presence of a cool morning breeze. People called him Master Hakuin. Visitors came from all walks of life. Those who felt disappointed, those who lost their way, mothers in tears over their children, elders whose loneliness stole their sleep, they all arrived and left. Yet when they stepped out of his humble thatched cottage, they seemed somehow lighter, not because their suffering had been erased, but perhaps because they had been heard, without judgment, without advice, just a still, peaceful presence that gently mirrored their own hearts. Then life happened, as it always does when stillness is met with challenge. A young woman in the village became pregnant and, unable to confide in her parents, falsely accused Hakuin of being the father. Her words hit like a stone thrown into a tranquil lake, stirring shockwaves. Gossip spread, anger flared. The villagers came, eyes filled with blame, voices trembling with outrage. The woman's parents confronted Hakuin, glaring at him, accusing, shaming him as a hypocrite wearing holy robes, yet delivering something so impure. In that moment, everyone expected him to respond. Would he defend himself? Demand justice? Anger or protest? But Hakuin replied with just 3 words. So what? No denial, no explanation, no apology, no defense. Just, so what? As if a breeze simply brushed past a blade of grass, leaving no mark. The stronger the storm outside, the deeper his inner stillness became. People left, consumed with fury, determined to spread the truth. The respected Zen master became a pariah. Children no longer climbed into his garden to play. Villagers avoided passing by him. Suspicion and whispers, like invisible thorns, pricked him day after day. Yet he remained unchanged. Each morning, he awoke, practiced meditation, tended the garden, drew water from the well, living as if nothing had happened. When someone dared mention the pregnancy, he only smiled and said, So what? Winter arrived, and gentle snow blanketed the village. The young woman's parents returned, holding a baby wrapped in a worn blanket. Because you are the father, you must raise this child, they said, handing the baby to Hakuin. Again, no argument, no refusal, no resentment. He simply looked at the child and said, once more, so what? From that moment, his life revolved around the baby's breath and cries. He fashioned a cradle from woven bamboo, accepted milk from neighbors moved by compassion, learned to rock the baby to sleep, singing lullabies he had never sung in his monastic years. Each night, he watched the child sleep by soft moonlight and whispered, so what? Like a vow of acceptance. A silent mantra, a way of living. As the days passed, the child grew, and Hakuin remained silent, unmoved, neither sad nor joyful, neither regretful nor bitter. Then, in another spring when cherry blossoms returned, the young woman and her parents came to his door. Their anger had vanished, replaced by remorse. We apologize, they said. Our daughter admitted the truth. The father was a fishmonger. Not you. Hakuin looked at them, the baby still in his arms, and smiled. They offered to take the baby back and promised to tell the villagers the truth. He handed the child over gently, as if that childbearing year had never woven a deep bond. As if nights of wakefulness, midnight cries, silent embraces in the cold had never happened. And he spoke once more, so what? This story is not meant to make us admire Hakuin. It is meant to help us look within. When falsely accused, how do we respond? When our reputation is taken from us, do we cling desperately? When we are misunderstood, do we fight to prove ourselves? When asked to care for a child not born of us, do we resent it? And when we release, are we sad? Hakuin neither fled nor held tight. He allowed everything to come and go, like clouds drifting over a mountain peak. Not uncaring, but seeing clearly. Reaction only deepens suffering, while silence is freedom. His 3 words were more than a response. They were a gaze, a release, a profound letting go, even of himself. It is hard to explain in words why such simple words, so what, shake the heart so deeply. Perhaps because in Hakuin's gaze, every event became a ripple on a vast sea, no matter how turbulent. It would pass, dissolve, and still, he remained, the quiet depths unaffected. Or perhaps, deep within, his ego had dissolved, not a self to defend, no reputation to uphold, no argument to win, and within that spacious absence, without defense, without protest, without claim, something lights up beyond what words can reach. Who could endure slander without needing vindication? Who could face the entire village turned away, endure humiliation and isolation, yet remain serene as if nothing had happened? Who could nurture a child not theirs, then hand it back without grasping or grieving? If we hear this story, as I am telling it now, our first reaction may not be admiration but silence, a real pause in the heart. We begin to realize that our own reactions are the real source of suffering. It's not because someone else is wrong, but because we want to be right. It's not because we are falsely accused, but because we can't accept things not going our way. It's not because we lose something, but because we're not ready to let go. When someone judges us, we get angry. When someone misunderstands us, we feel sad. When things don't go as planned, we feel disappointed. And then, We see Hakuin simply smile and say, "So what?" That question isn't meant to belittle or oppose. It's not meant to provoke. Nor is it indifference. It's a perspective beyond right and wrong, true and false, should and shouldn't. It's the view of someone who has crossed to the other side, where nothing needs to be judged. No winners or losers are needed, and no explanations are required. That question touches us, not in our minds, but with a vibration deep in our hearts, in places we never dared to face. Maybe, in a moment, when someone misunderstands us, when we force ourselves to prove our innocence, when we find ourselves in an injustice so overwhelming it feels hopeless, we will remember Hakuin. And we will try to pause, just for an instant, and whisper to ourselves, "So what?" Not to give up, but to see that we're grasping too tightly. Not to be apathetic, but to notice that resistance is exhausting us. Not to endure suffering, but to open another door, the door of acceptance. Observation, releasing the wounded ego clinging inside us. Because sometimes, in doing nothing, no reaction, no judgment, we touch the deepest part of ourselves. That is freedom, not driven by external circumstances. Freedom from the struggle of the ego. Freedom from the need to control, to prove, to be loved or understood. When we live with that freedom, everything that happens, good or bad, is just wind blowing across a field. Leaves falling in autumn, a passing shower before the porch. We don't need to stop the rain or hold on to the sunshine. We just need to be present. Just breathe. Just see clearly everything as it is. And then something miraculous happens. What once caused us pain becomes our teacher. The injustices we endure become opportunities for practice. What seemed worst brings us closest to ourselves. Like Hakuin, we don't need fame, apologies, or recognition for being right. We just need to live with inner stillness, with one simple question: so what? Early in the morning at a mountain monastery, mist still drapes the old pine branches, and the bamboo broom sweeping dry leaves echoes like the breath of earth and sky. A young monk named Teisui quietly sweeps the courtyard, every footstep deliberate, every motion humble, though youthful. Teisui's eyes reflect a deep seeking, a longing to understand and to touch something beyond books or teachings. On what seems like an ordinary morning, Zen Master Nisan, a stern yet wise teacher, calls him over. "Bring me a bucket of water to cool the bath." Without delay, Teisui sets aside the broom, bows respectfully, and walks swiftly to fetch the water, touching the wooden bucket as though it were sacred. The ancient well lies in the back courtyard, mossy and worn from generations of monks bowing at it. The rope creaks steadily in the clear air as water is drawn. When the bucket is full, Teisui carries it back and pours it into the bath, which already contains hot water. Steam wafts up like thin smoke. After his task is done, he's about to pour the leftover water onto the ground. In that moment, the master's voice cuts through like a sword. "Stop." Not angry, not harsh, yet the words hang heavy in the air. Teisui freezes, surprised, and looks at his teacher. In the master's gaze there's no blame, only a question that reaches deep into his bones. By what right do you waste even a single drop of water in this temple? In that moment, no one speaks. Silence becomes a wordless teaching. The bucket still tilts in Teisui's hands. Each drop trembles as if whispering something small yet true. Then a miracle happens, not through excuses, not through protest, but through an inner shift. Taesui quietly turns and walks to the vegetable garden behind the temple. Bending low, he gently waters the young seedlings with the remaining water. His eyes follow each trickle as though beholding something precious. Not too much, not too little, just enough. From that day forward, everything Taesui does changes. No more doing things just to get them done or without care. When he rinses rice, he is fully aware of each grain's journey here. When he washes dishes, he uses only what water is needed. When he passes a fallen leaf, he bends to pick it up with full presence. Once, a fellow monk asked, "Why do you take such care?" Taesui smiled and said, "Because I learned that nothing is just a drop of water. In one drop of water, there is a whole universe." Years later he becomes a teacher and takes the Dharma name Taesui, meaning, drop of water. Not to glorify himself, but to remind himself for life that the smallest thing, seen with a clear mind, can become a gateway to awakening. This story isn't just a lesson in conserving or caring for the environment. It's a quiet reminder. In life we waste countless things every day, not only water, but time, presence, kind attention, mindful breathing. Moments we judge unimportant. We discard them as if they mean nothing. We throw away opportunities for awareness because we think they are too small. But if we learn to pause, as Taesui paused, then even in watering a single plant we can see life unfolding. In our fast-paced modern life, where hurry becomes normal and we spend energy on things that haven't arrived yet, the story of the water drop rings like a soft bell calling us home. Every moment we live, if we live it fully, will never be wasted. Every breath, in and out, with presence, is a miracle. And nothing is small when we live with a big heart. A drop of water, seen with mindful eyes, can become a full moon on a dark night. Yet the deep meaning of a drop of water does not end with watering the plant, nor with the wooden bucket stored back in the kitchen corner. From that moment, Taesui begins a new journey. Not a journey searching for truth outside, but a journey returning to every gesture, every step, every wisp of steam rising from a boiling pot of soup, every moment washing his hands under cool flowing water. He no longer sees the world as something to explore or conquer, but as a living being to be fully experienced with presence. And then, a quiet yet profound change begins to spread from him, like a drop of water soaking into the earth. Unseen, yet nourishing the roots of trees. His fellow monks start to notice. They see the way he lifts his rice bowl with two hands as if embracing heaven and earth. They see him washing vegetables, his gaze never leaving each leaf as if speaking gently with them. They see him putting his palms together in gasho to bow to the Buddha. His bow not ritual, but genuine gratitude, for being alive, for breathing, for practicing amid life's impermanence. And then, something began to happen. No one was told to change. Yet everything quietly shifted. The person sweeping leaves in the morning paused for a moment to watch sunlight reflecting off a drop of dew. The cook paid more attention to the flame, no longer cooking hastily. The person washing dishes could feel the coolness of the water running over their hands. And in that coolness, they felt more awake. The entire monastery seemed a little quieter, a little lighter, as if even the air had been cleansed by the mindfulness spreading from within. Yet Taesui never said a word. He did not preach or teach. He simply lived, each day, like a drop of water. Clear, without color or taste, but nourishing all life. Then one early summer day, while the earth and sky were soaked by thousands of drops falling from the high clouds, a stranger came to the temple, carrying what seemed to be a simple question: how can I live more deeply? He was invited into the meditation hall and arranged to speak with Taesui. But instead of offering any explanation, Taesui simply bowed, poured a cup of tea, and slid it across the table. He said nothing more, only looked out the window, where raindrops were slowly tracing clear lines on the wooden frame. The guest sat in silence, then slowly lifted the tea to his lips. As the tea touched his tongue, something strange happened. Not a loud enlightenment, not a glorious answer, just a soft slowing of thought, a long breath, and a quiet realization that perhaps he had been missing so much in life simply because he had been in too much of a rush. When the guest left, the rain was still falling. He looked back at Taesui, still sitting where he had been, and bowed deeply, as if thanking someone who had said everything without saying a word. Later, the guest recalled that he could no longer remember Taesui's face clearly. But he remembered exactly the taste of the tea that day, and the sound of a raindrop falling from the roof onto a tender leaf. That sound stayed with him for the rest of his life, like a gentle reminder that to live is to be present. We do not need to do much. Just one thing, done with full presence, can become sacred. That's the story of Taesui. Not dramatic, not mysterious, not elaborate. It is simply a pause. A moment in which we suddenly realize that we've been living too fast for too long. That we've wasted too many drops of water, too many breaths, too many relationships, too many chances to understand ourselves and to love others. Each day passes like a drop falling into our hands. If we're not awake, that hand lets the water slip away unnoticed. But if we open it with gratitude and presence, we can hold each drop, not to possess, but to treasure. Because one drop of water is not just water. It is rain. It is river. It is the whole ocean. It is life. Just as a single moment is not just time. It is our very life. And only when we live like a drop of water, pure, humble, quietly nourishing, do we truly touch the beauty of every moment. As time went on, the monastery gradually became a place more and more people sought out. Not because of Taesui's fame, not because of powerful teachings or mystical scriptures. They came for something hard to explain, a feeling of coming home. Like placing your hands in warm water after a freezing day. Like sitting beneath a tree on a bright summer afternoon. Some came in sorrow, some came out of curiosity, and others just happened to stop by on a long pilgrimage. But all of them received the same thing, a nameless silence. Taesui did not ask many questions. Nor did he teach the way people imagined a master would. He often simply walked slowly with them through the garden behind the temple, where the soft paths still held the footprints of those who had left long ago. Sometimes, he would sit under the eaves, wash a cup, pick up a fallen leaf, or quietly blow ash from a small charcoal stove. But in those moments that seemed like nothing, people felt they were being guided to something very real, very deep, without a single word spoken. Some have asked, how could a single drop of water change an entire life? Maybe because it never tried to change anything. It didn't instruct, didn't push, didn't prove. It simply flowed, and in its flowing, it softened, it cleansed, it awakened, just like Taisui, who never tried to become a master, never wished to be honored, but because he lived like a drop of water, seeping gently into the earth. Nourishing roots, never hurrying, never boasting, he became a pure spring for those who had dried out. And from that, he ceased to be just a person. He became a stillness where anyone could lay down their burdens and hear their own breath again. One late autumn, when the maple leaves began to turn red across the forest surrounding the temple, a young disciple was assigned to record Taisui's life and teachings. He carried pen and paper, sitting by the master for weeks, observing every small action, from how Taisui split firewood for the coming winter, to how he prepared tea every morning. But after many days, the notebook remained blank, not because there was nothing to write, but because there was nothing that could be written into words. What he saw, what he felt, was like wind brushing over the surface of a lake, stirring ripples in the heart but leaving no trace on the page. One morning, as the mist returned, he gathered the courage to say, "Master, I do not know how to begin writing about you." Taisui, drawing water from the well, paused, looked up, pointed to the bucket just filled, and said, "Just write about this drop of water." Then he carried the bucket into the kitchen, leaving the young disciple standing silently under the early sun. The disciple opened his notebook and began to write. "My teacher was a man who left no footprints in the sand, but planted a drop of rain in my heart." And from that first line, the words began to flow, not lofty teachings, but simple notes on how to live, how to pick up a leaf with both hands, how to sit quietly and listen to a bird's song, how to close one's eyes and sense the fragrance of rinsing rice. And in each small detail, he saw a path, not one marked by signs or milestones, but clear as the moon reflected in still water. A path that leads us back to ourselves, not through thinking, but through full presence in each moment. Years later, as an old man and a teacher to others, that disciple still kept the same notebook. He never published it, never shared it widely. He simply placed it on a small altar beside a ceramic jar of rainwater. Each morning, he would pour a cup from that jar, set it before a Buddha statue, and bow deeply, not asking for anything, not waiting for anything, just as a gesture to remind himself that today, he was still awake enough to live like a drop of water. And that was a miracle. Late in the afternoon, high in a remote mountain region, as the golden light of sunset painted the pine trees and stretched the shadows of temple rooftops across the worn stone courtyard, an old monk sat on a wooden porch, holding a yellowed letter in his hand. The breeze was gentle, carrying the scent of dried grass, while the distant sound of a temple bell echoed like a call from impermanence itself. That man was Zen Master Basui Tokusho, a revered teacher known not only for his words, sharp as blades slicing through cold wind, but for his silent compassion toward those walking through the darkest nights of their lives. In his final years, he lived simply in a small thatched hut deep in the forest, a place that only the truly seeking could ever reach. People often said that Basui did not teach the way like someone bestowing knowledge. He merely invited us to look deeper into our fears, so we might find the door we long ago forgot. One day, a message was brought to him, urgent news from a former disciple named Iguchi, who had once studied under him but later left monastic life to become a layperson. In his letter, Iguchi shared that he had been diagnosed with a terminal illness and could feel death drawing near. He wrote that although he had listened to many teachings and read countless sutras, now, lying still in his bed, face to face with the end, everything he had ever learned felt hollow. The only thing he truly needed now was a word from his old master, not to comfort him, but to guide him. Basui sat silently for a long time after reading the letter. He did not rush to respond. He did not answer with words. Instead, he took out his inkstone and began to grind ink slowly, as if he were grinding away his disciple's fear. Each stroke of black ink mixing with water seemed to merge with the breath of someone dying far away. When the ink reached the right darkness, Basui took out a sheet of paper and began to write. He did not offer comforting words. He did not repeat old lessons. Instead, he wrote something as simple as it was unshakably powerful. Your mind was never born, and so it can never die. It has no shape, no color, and it feels neither joy nor sorrow, pleasure nor pain. It cannot die, because it was never born. You do not need to pray for anything. Just turn within and ask, what is feeling sick? What is afraid? What is hoping not to die? When you look deeply, you will see there is no one there. There is only mind, vast, still, without boundaries. Death is like a dream. When you wake, you will see you were never born and never died. The end of the body is like a snowflake melting into clear air. After the letter was sent, a young novice who had followed Basui asked, Master, what did you teach the man who is about to die? But Basui only looked toward the pine ridge. His robe stirred gently by the wind, and said nothing. In that silence, the boy understood. Some things cannot be explained. They can only be touched through the deepest listening within. And elsewhere, far away, when the letter was opened at the bedside, Iguchi read each line slowly. When he reached the words, a snowflake melting into clear air, he gently closed his eyes. The tension on his face, drawn tight by pain and fear, gradually softened. The corners of his mouth lifted, not in joy, but in quiet acceptance, the smile of someone who had just laid down a heavy burden. That night, he passed away in peace. No cries, no final words, only a breath, light as wind, dissolving into space. Witnesses said the room suddenly became crystal clear at the moment he died, as if a light had poured in, not from candles, but from within the one who had let go. And in that still space, the words of Zen Master Basui continued to echo. Even without a voice reading them, the mind was never born, so it can never die. That line was not a theory. It was a doorway, a bridge across the river of birth and death. Not to escape death, but to see that death was never a problem, if we know who we truly are. In the days that followed, the letter was copied, read to the dying, passed hand to hand like a stream of cool water through the desert of fear. But no one could ever replicate the first moment it was received, when it reached the right person at the right time, like a raindrop falling onto a withered flower. Because true teaching does not lie in its content. It lies in the heart from which it is given. And Basui had written it without needing to know the result, without seeking thanks. Later, when people asked, what does it mean to go beyond death? They no longer searched for another place. No longer longed for heaven or immortality. They simply sat in stillness, as Basui once did, watching clouds drift over the mountains, listening to leaves fall in the old forest, whispering to themselves, "I was never born. I have never vanished. I am only changing form, like water returning to the clouds." In the view of Zen, death is no longer an end, and no longer a tragedy. It becomes a return to where we never left, to the formless, colorless, nameless mind, and the greatest comfort is not in promises of the next life, but in the realization that if we are truly awake in this moment, there is nothing left to fear. Time passed quietly, like the breath of earth and sky. Zen master Basui continued to live in his forest hut, where each day was marked not by calendars, but by birdsong, falling leaves, and the stillness of the heart. He did not know, and perhaps never needed to know, that the letter he wrote had become a bridge for someone crossing life's greatest fear. And it was precisely because he did not expect anything that his words held such power. They were not explanations, not attempts to ease pain, not promises of eternity or paradise. They were a clear pointing to something anyone could return to, the uncreated, undying nature of the mind. And here lies the miracle. When people stop clinging to life, they can truly live their final moment. When they stop fighting death, death is no longer a wall, but a door into boundless space. From that day on, Basui spoke little about the teachings. When people came asking about life and death, he simply smiled and said, "Find your true mind before you die. Otherwise, when death comes, there will be no one left to find it." At first, the line sounds like a warning, but for anyone who has experienced deep loss, who has sat beside a loved one's deathbed, who has felt the helplessness of not being able to hold on, those words are not a threat. They are a wake-up call filled with compassion, because if we wait until death comes to start searching for the mind's true nature, it may be too late. But if we live with awareness in each moment, then every step, every look, every embrace, every word becomes a chance to touch that uncreated, undying truth, without needing to wait until we are lying down for the last time. In the final year of his life, Basui continued to chop wood, cook, and pull weeds in the garden like an old layman. Not like some grand teacher. He did not live by titles, did not sit on a high seat, did not carry the glow of any legend. He lived like morning mist, so light that unless you were paying attention, you would not even notice he was there. But it was in that lightness that his presence was most complete. Because some people leave behind thousands of books and hundreds of sermons, yet are forgotten within a few years. Others leave only a handwritten letter, a simple phrase, a silent smile, and their echo lingers in the hearts of others, like a bell that never stops ringing. Basui's letter was later carved into stone, not to be worshipped, but to serve as a reminder. The engraved words, resting among windswept pine trees, stood in a place few people ever discovered, but those who happened upon it, and could sit in stillness, would hear something very faint, like the voice of their own heart echoing through stone, through moss, through the changing seasons of rain and sun. It is said that some young Zen practitioners, upon reading the words, "The mind was never born and will never die," suddenly burst into tears, not out of fear, but because, for the first time, Something deep within them felt lighter. Something they had never named before. Some cried remembering parents who had passed. Others cried because they finally realized the daily fear they carried was not real. And some did not cry at all. But from that day forward, they lived more slowly. They sat longer with their bowls of rice. They bowed more deeply before the Buddha. They looked more closely into the eyes of the person in front of them. Because they understood. Death is not something to run from. When understood rightly, death becomes a companion reminding us to truly live. And so, the letter no longer belonged to Iguchi alone. It became a whisper for anyone walking the path without a name. It did not tell us what to do, did not promise what lies beyond the final door, did not demand belief. It simply pointed. There is a place within us that has never been born and will never die. That place is not found in the body, not in ideas, not in memories. It is the foundation, the stillness at the heart of the storm, the life that observes life itself. And when we touch that place, even for a moment, all questions fall away. There is no one asking, and no one answering. Only a calm, like the sky watching everything without needing to interfere. Basui passed away on a quiet spring day. There was no grand funeral, no final message. He was found sitting in meditation on his porch, hands gently resting on his lap, eyes softly closed, lips curved as if in a faint smile. The spring breeze brushed his robe, and a young leaf drifted onto his silver hair. And those who saw understood, he had left as someone who had never arrived. Like a cloud dissolving into the sky. Not a single trace, but in the hearts of those who had once read that final letter, who had felt its substance with their own hearts, Basui had never left. He was still here, in every mindful breath, in each pause we take in the rush of life, whispering to ourselves, who is the one living? Who is the one who will die? Is anyone truly arriving or leaving? In a small temple deep in the mountains, there lived a monk named Tanzan. People remembered him not for his formal appearance or powerful sermons, but for how he lived, simple and natural. Like the breath of the forest. He often laughed, and when he looked at someone, his eyes seemed to see through all the layers they carried: fame, status, beliefs, doubts, and rested on the tender truth of a person searching for something greater than themselves. One day, Tanzan was walking with a young monk named Aikido, traveling from one temple to another, crossing a vast rural area. As they walked, a sudden rainstorm turned the dirt road into a muddy mess. Slippery and thick, at a bend in the path, they came upon a young woman in a kimono, hesitating by the roadside, unable to cross the mud to reach her home. Without a word, Tanzan stepped forward, smiled gently, and picked her up, carrying her through the mud. Once across, he placed her down, gave a nod, and walked on, his feet muddy, his sleeves soaked, as if he had done nothing unusual. The girl thanked him with trembling eyes, then quietly walked away. Aikido, who had been following in silence, said nothing for the rest of the long walk. But when they finally returned to the temple, after many miles, he could no longer hold back. "We are monks," he said. "We are not supposed to be near women, especially young and beautiful ones. How could you carry her like that?" Tanzan paused for a moment, then burst into laughter, not mocking, but clear and light like a mountain stream. "I put her down hours ago, at the edge of the mud. Are you still carrying her?" At that moment, Aikido was stunned into silence. Not because he was rebuked, but because he realized he had been carrying an image, a judgment, a question the whole way back, while the one he had silently accused of being wrong was completely empty. Light, like a cloud passing over the mountains, in what seemed like a rule-breaking act was, in fact, absolute freedom, unentangled, leaving no mark, not caught in right or wrong, good or bad. Tanzan did not help the girl because he wanted to be good or to prove anything. He simply saw someone who needed help, helped her, and then left the moment behind, without letting it settle in his heart. And that is the true purity a practitioner seeks, not avoiding all things that might cause disturbance, but not letting disturbance take root within. In Zen, the goal is not to avoid life, but to walk through it untouched, like someone walking on wet sand but leaving no footprints. Purity is not about outward behavior, but about a heart free from attachment. Meanwhile, Aikido, with all his discipline and sincerity, had kept within him a shadow, a judgment, a conflict, and that is what burdened him on the journey home. How many times in life are we like Aikido? We follow the rules, we do the right thing, we fear making mistakes, yet we do not see how tightly our thoughts are binding us. We carry people in our minds, replay stories, question and analyze and wrestle, never realizing that the other person, the situation, has long since been put down. That is what Tanzan wished to show, not to teach, but to liberate. To put something down is not to forget, nor to give up, it is to act from awareness, to see things as they are, without adding meaning, without layering ego. To put it down means not dragging the past into the present, not pulling what is gone into the now, not imprisoning ourselves in learned ideas of right and wrong, while forgetting the heart that simply listens. And most importantly, to stop carrying others inside us without realizing it, because every time we do, we lose a little of our freedom. Years later, Aikido became a well-known Zen master, and he himself told this story to his disciples, not with pride, but with honesty. He said that day was not only when he learned about the mind free from attachment, but also when he began to understand unconditional compassion. That sometimes, someone lifting another across a muddy path is also lifting them beyond the mental boundaries of the one who is watching. And that the real lesson was not in whether the act broke a rule, but in the ability to walk away from what we cling to and call morality. Those who hear this story, if they are quiet enough, will sense one thing: that true freedom does not lie in shutting ourselves away from the world, but in the ability to live fully within it without being pulled along by its current. We can engage without clinging. We can help without becoming entangled. We can love without needing to bind. Just as Tanzan did, he stepped into a moment and stepped out without leaving a single footprint. And that is why he was truly walking the path of freedom, the path without traces. Each time the story is retold, it is not to glorify one person or shame another, but to remind us of something simple yet profound. Inner peace is not the result of distance, but the fruit of deep seeing. And to see deeply is to recognize that everything comes and goes, but we alone choose what to hold on to. If we can learn to put things down, then even a life full of muddy paths can never soil our hearts. Years later, after passing his 60th year, Aikido quietly returned to that very road, where he and Tanzan had once walked through the rain. The dirt path of that day was now paved with smooth stones. No more mud, no more rustling grasses lining its edge. But the memory remained, like a mark without form, like a breath tucked inside the chest of time. Aikido paused, placed his hand over his heart, as if listening to a rhythm from the past, not outside, but reawakening inside him. He knelt, touched the ground, now dry and firm, but still felt a cool dampness spread through his fingertips. Then he gently closed his eyes and exhaled a long breath, as if finally releasing something he had unknowingly carried for years. Because sometimes, we believe we have understood, let go, moved on, but deep within, something remains unseen, not yet resolved, still hiding in the narrow cracks of memory. Like a shadow we once judged, once blamed, once labeled wrong, without realizing that it was the judgment itself that bound us to what had already passed. And so, Aikido understood. The muddy path of that day was not only on the road they walked, but within his own mind, a hidden swamp shaped by rigid beliefs, by unshakable ideas of morality he once thought were sacred. But Tanzan, with a simple and pure act, had shown the way through, not by avoiding the mud, but by stepping through it, mindfully, lightly, and without letting it cling to the heart. Only then did Aikido understand why Tanzan could laugh so freely when questioned. He was not mocking his companion's naivety, but laughing at the subtlety of attachment, the kind that hides behind robes of virtue, behind vows of discipline, beneath the surface of correctness, but is still clinging. That laughter, wide as the sky and light as the breeze, was the sign of someone who had crossed the boundary between action and identity. For Tanzan did not see himself as a monk doing something wrong, he was simply a human being. With eyes to see, hands to help, and a heart unburdened, he lived in the present. And when the moment passed, he let it go completely. Later, whenever Aikido gave a Dharma talk, he would often sit in silence for a long time before speaking. His disciples once asked why every teaching began with such a long pause. Sometimes so extended it made people uncomfortable. But he knew, some things cannot be spoken right away. Some spaces must be created before any words can arise, for it is in that space that real listening happens. And sometimes, in that silence, those sitting before him felt something unfamiliar, not a new idea, not a piece of knowledge, but a space opening inside their own hearts. A space where no one was right, no one was wrong, where they were no longer burdened by what they should or should not do. That space, that was the freedom Aikido had learned from his teacher, not through theory, but through a muddy path and a selfless act that left no trace. It is said that Aikido was never quite the same after that moment. He still kept his vows, still meditated daily, still held himself to discipline, but something inside him had softened. He no longer judged others too quickly. He no longer believed that following rules was the destination, but understood it as merely the vehicle. He no longer tried to prove anything to others, or even to himself, and in the later years of his life, he often walked alone in the early mornings, sometimes stopping beside a small flower, smiling as if speaking silently with an old friend, the one he once misunderstood, and from whom he had learned the most. When Aikido passed away, there was no grand ceremony. By his request, only a few close disciples knelt beside his small hut, On the altar, instead of sacred texts, he left behind a single handwritten note. Mud only sticks to your feet if you keep looking down. Step through it, and walk on, leaving no trace. That line was hung above the temple gate, as both a greeting and a farewell. No one knows for sure whether Tanzan was still alive on the day Aikido died. But some say that in a northern temple, an old man stood a long time under a light rain, holding a worn umbrella, and softly said, "At last, you have let it go." And so the story ends, not with a moral, not with a conclusion, but with a stillness beyond words. Like footprints dissolving in the rain, like breath blending with wind, like someone who once walked through our lives and left nothing behind, except a deep, quiet sense of ease. To live like that is to be free. Nanin smiled gently, set down the teapot, and kept his eyes on the spreading pool of tea. He said, "Just like this cup, your mind is already full of ideas, full of opinions, full of knowledge. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup?" That sentence, like a cold wind brushing through summer heat, stopped the scholar in his tracks, not because he did not understand the meaning, but because he had never imagined that fullness could be what held him back. All those years, he thought he was seeking more, but in truth, he had only been stacking layer upon layer of concepts, like someone building a wall from bricks and forgetting to leave a door. Knowledge, when not carried with humility and the ability to let go, becomes nothing more than heavy stones blocking the gate of intuition. From that moment, a silence spread between them, not awkward or forced, but a kind of space in which the scholar began quietly removing the layers he had worn for so long. He started to see that the problem had never been what he knew, but the belief that he already knew enough. And within that, enough, he had closed off all possibility of touching what was truly alive, not on the pages of books, not in theories, but in a look, in the sound of bamboo swaying in the breeze, in the rising scent of tea on a still morning. Because Zen, in the end, is not something to be learned, it is something to be directly experienced. Like fragrance cannot be grasped through words, like taste cannot be understood through ideas. When the mind is full, everything is filtered through analysis. But when the mind is empty, we can finally see things as they are. The scholar stayed at the monastery for many days afterward, no longer asking for teachings, no longer seeking secrets. He swept leaves, cooked rice, carried water, quietly, like any other lay practitioner. One time, he sat alone on the stone steps, holding a warm cup of tea, watching the morning mist dissolve over the lake. A young novice passed by and asked, "Are you meditating?" He smiled and said nothing, because in that moment, there was no longer any divide between meditating and not meditating, between knowing and not knowing. There was only presence, clear as mist, still as water, warm as the scent of tea drifting into the morning light. That was when he understood. What Nanin did on that first day was not a critique, but an invitation, a door that could only be opened when the heart was truly empty. And he carried that story with him for the rest of his life, not as a tale to be told, but as a personal reflection. Whenever he felt certainty arise in his mind, he would ask himself, "Is my cup full?" Whenever he was about to dismiss an idea, interrupt someone, or explain away a phenomenon, he would pause. Just as Nanin had paused in mid-pour. He no longer preached, no longer told others how to live. He chose instead to live as an empty cup. Ready to receive, ready to let go, ready for the wind to pass through the heart without catching on anything at all. The story of the full teacup is not a long one, but it is a lesson any of us can carry. Because each of us, whether teacher or student, parent or lover, friend or stranger, has moments when we think we are listening. But we are really just holding on to what we already know. And so, we do not truly hear anyone at all. But if today, you can look within and ask, am I still pouring into a cup that is already full? Then maybe that is the very first moment you begin to learn how to live. Not to gather more, but to release. To see that happiness is not found in more, but in just enough. And just enough comes when our hearts make space for life to flow through. Uncontained by any frame. Years later, after leaving that Zen monastery, the man once known as a great scholar was no longer called a scholar at all. He had let go of his titles, left behind the lecture halls, the towering stacks of books, the essays that once drew admiration. He wandered from place to place with no intention to teach, no need to prove anything. If someone recognized him and called him master, he would only smile and nod like greeting an old friend, neither confirming nor denying. He no longer felt the need to clarify who he was, because from the day he left the monastery, he had understood that he had never truly been anything at all. All the names, roles, and knowledge were merely robes worn in a long drama called life. And now, with those robes removed, he was simply someone walking, not to get anywhere, not to leave anywhere behind. He often sat in small roadside tea houses, sipping a hot cup of tea, listening to the sound of water boiling on a wood stove, watching the steam curl and vanish into the morning light. Sometimes, he said nothing at all. Sometimes, he listened quietly to the stories of a street vendor, a grieving widow, or a child who had left school. He gave no advice, yet they would sit beside him and tell their stories, not knowing why it felt so easy to speak. And when they finished, they felt lighter, not because they received an answer, but because, for the first time, someone had truly listened, without interrupting, without rushing to fix, without drawing conclusions. He sat like a still body of water, reflecting everything, holding nothing, and in that stillness, people saw themselves more clearly. The broken pieces within them seemed to mend, not by repair, but by the quiet settling of the heart. And so, when asked about Zen, he no longer explained. He simply poured tea, slowly, carefully. When the cup was full, he stopped. No words, no metaphor, no need for teachings, because the act itself was the lesson. Some understood and bowed in gratitude before leaving. Some did not understand and asked again. He only smiled. He was no longer impatient with others' confusion, because he knew that each person carried their own teacup. Only when they themselves noticed it was full could the act of pouring mean anything. One cannot force learning on a mind already crowded with concepts and opinions. And he no longer needed to be understood, no longer craved acknowledgement. He lived as though every breath was a sip of tea, every step a return home. One day, in a small tea house by the river, he met a young man, just beginning his spiritual journey. Brimming with enthusiasm, overflowing with questions, the young man asked about enlightenment, awakening, the true face before birth, absolute reality, eternal awareness. He gave no answer. He simply offered him a cup of tea. poured it himself, making sure not to overfill. Then he pointed at the surface of the tea, where sunlight danced in tiny ripples, and said gently, "Only when the cup is just enough can the water remain still. If it is too full, every light will break apart." The young man paused, not fully understanding, but feeling something quietly loosen inside, a piece of urgency, a touch of grasping, a bit of strain, and in that still moment, the questions in his mind faded, not because they were answered, but because they no longer needed to be. From then on, he became someone whose name few remembered, but no one who met him ever forgot. Not because of what he said, but because of the stillness he carried. People called him the one who pours tea, a name of quiet respect, though he himself never asked to be called anything at all. And the story of the overflowing teacup continued to be told on silent nights in Zen halls, not as legend, but as a reminder. To see the light, the heart must be still. To understand Zen, we must first dare to let go. Because the way is not found in words, not in deep debates or clever metaphors, but in emptiness. In the space where there is no more clinging, no more proving, no more striving to become anyone at all. And if you are sitting here today, quietly in your own space, listening to this story, perhaps you too are holding an invisible teacup, filled to the brim with thoughts, opinions, and all the things you believe you know. But if you dare to pause, set the cup down, and look into the space around you, maybe, just maybe, you will hear the softest sound, the voice of your true self. Not the self of your past, not the self driven by future desires, but the self of this very moment, empty, still, and fully open. And that is when the tea can finally begin to pour in. One spring afternoon, as plum blossoms began to bloom along a narrow path into the mountains, a young man arrived at an old Zen temple. The place was wrapped in moss, mountain wind, and the endless calls of birds. He did not look like a pilgrim, nor a monk. His face showed confusion, and his footsteps carried the weight of something shapeless. He came to see the abbot, an elderly Zen master with white hair like clouds, living quietly like the shadow of the ancient pine at the temple gate. There were no Dharma drums, no rows of disciples, no reciting of scriptures, only a stillness that blanketed everything, as if this was not a place to learn, but a place to return to. The young man knelt down, not asking for anything specific, and whispered like a breath lost in the wind, "I cannot find the way." The Zen master looked at him but said nothing, did not question him, only rose slowly and stepped inside. When he returned, he held a small bamboo broom. Without a word, he began sweeping the courtyard. He swept through dry leaves, fallen petals, and dust on ancient stones. At first, the young man thought the master had not heard him. So he raised his voice, "Master, I am lost. I do not know where I am going. Everything feels meaningless. I have studied so much, worked so hard, traveled so far, and still, I feel empty." The master did not stop. He kept sweeping. The wind blew, more leaves fell, dust swirled again, yet he showed no frustration, no impatience. He simply swept, until at last, the silence became a mirror, reflecting back every bit of turmoil inside the young man, so clearly that he nearly wept. And then, when the courtyard was clean, when the broom came to rest beside a small wildflower blooming in the corner, The Zen master finally spoke. If you are truly lost, then no one can show you the way. But if you know you are lost, then that means you have already begun to return. That line rang like a distant bell inside the young man's heart. He did not fully understand, but something softened in his chest, as if an old door within had begun to creak open. The master said no more, only gestured to a stone bench beside a clear pond that reflected the sky. The young man sat down. He did not know what to do, did not know what to think, but for the first time, he no longer felt like running. And in that stillness, the first thing that came was not a grand realization, but a long sigh, a sigh he had not realized he had been holding for so long. Day after day, he stayed at the temple. No one gave him formal teachings. No one told him to chant or bow. He was simply given small tasks: tending fire, carrying water, sweeping leaves, picking vegetables. Each task was simple, but not easy. They demanded his full presence. When his mind wandered, the water would spill, the fire would go out, the vegetables would fall. He slowly learned to do each act as if it were the last thing he would ever do. No rushing, no waiting for results, just being there, and in the process, he felt his heart slowly being cleared, like the courtyard after a long sweep. No longer full of great ambitions, but also no longer full of chaos. One day, while sweeping under the plum tree, he remembered why he had come: the confusion, the sleepless nights, the questions about meaning, identity, the world. Strangely, they were still there, but they no longer frightened him. They drifted like clouds, visible but no longer pulling him in. And he recalled the master's words: if you know you are lost, then you have already begun to return. Because being lost is not a mistake, it is the sign that we have stepped off the worn-out path. And only when we realize we are lost can we finally hear the quiet voice within. When he left the temple, spring had come again. The breeze was cool, the clouds drifted, and the sky was astonishingly clear. The master walked him to the gate. He said nothing, only nodded and looked at him with eyes that seemed to give him the entire mountain. Just before stepping away, the young man bowed deeply, then looked up and asked, for the first and only time, "Master, where should I go now?" The Zen master smiled gently, his eyes reflecting the sky. "You can go anywhere. The door was never closed." He stood there for a long while, and in that moment, every question he had ever asked seemed to dissolve into a single answer without words. Then he turned and walked down the mountain, not with the heavy steps he had arrived with, but light as falling petals. No longer seeking, no longer expecting, just walking. Because now, he knew, the path had never been out there, and the door he thought he had to knock on endlessly had been open all along, waiting for someone quiet enough to see it. After leaving the temple, the young man began a journey, not toward a specific home, but back into himself, the place he had long forgotten how to enter. Each step he took down that mountain path felt different from when he arrived. No more rushing, no more restlessness, no more sense of escaping something unseen. Every step was a touch of the present, a gentle whisper to himself that he no longer needed to go far to find what had always been here. The mountains still stood. The wind still rustled through the trees. Birds still sang without pause, and he realized the world had never been silent. It was only that his mind had been too noisy to hear it. Every sound, Every movement, every image became vivid, not because the world had changed, but because he had peeled away the heavy curtain of attachment and ignorance. On the journey back to his village, he passed a small river. Before, this river had always made him pause, not for its beauty, but because he would stand there asking, "Why does my life feel like this stream? Endlessly flowing with no clear destination?" But today, as he stood by the water, he no longer sought an answer. He simply watched. He saw the drops crash into rocks, separate, rejoin, and continue onward, and in that moment, he understood something the Zen master had never said out loud: it does not matter where the river is going. What matters is that it is flowing, and in that flow, everything is already complete. We suffer not because we do not know the future, but because we try to control it. We feel lost not because we lack direction, but because we resist staying with what is here now. But when we learn to sit still within the wind, without needing the wind to stop, when we can watch a falling leaf without needing to assign it meaning, then the path no longer matters. Because every step we take is already the path. When you return to the village where you grew up, everything seems just the same: the low wooden houses, the morning cooking smoke drifting up, the sound of children running and playing at the gate, neighbors calling each other to go to market. No one notices that you've become something different, and you don't feel any need to point it out either. You simply merge into that life, with a quieter heart, deeper and wider. Family, friends, neighbors might see you speaking less than before, but somehow feeling closer, like a sky without anything flashy. Yet everyone senses its gentle presence. You begin to live a very ordinary life, turning the soil, planting vegetables, helping elders light their fires, teaching children to read. There are no more big questions, no more deep doubts, not because all has been answered, but because you no longer feel the need to live inside those questions. Once, an old friend asked you, "Have you found the meaning of life yet?" You just smiled and gazed up at the sky. And your friend, caught by that silence, didn't ask again, because in your smile, there was something so distant, yet so near. Like a bell that doesn't ring, yet whose sound we still hear. Like a door no one opens, yet the wind still passes through. And if someone is still enough to sit beside you, they will feel that you carry no philosophy, no secret. You only live like a stream, flowing through each moment with profound simplicity. And then, as years pass, you become a person nobody labels, neither teacher, nor monk, nor sage, just a quiet person. But precisely in that quietness, people find comfort. Some travel far to see you, carrying questions about love, death, loss, spiritual paths. You answer no one. You only offer them a cup of tea. Invite them to watch the sunset, or take them for a walk through the wild chrysanthemum garden. And then, after a day, or a few days, or a week, they breathe a gentle sigh, as if setting down something heavy. Not because they were shown the way, but because for the first time they see they don't need a path. They only needed to sit, truly sit, with themselves. That's when you, who once was lost, understood most clearly the nature of a door. It doesn't need anyone to open it. It's always there, already open, only waiting for us to be still enough to notice. We travel the world, knock on each door, learn from every teacher, read every book, only to finally, in a quiet moment by the river, while picking vegetables, or sipping hot tea, you realize, The door was never closed. And you were never outside. There was once a boy living in a mountain edge village. Always curious about things adults couldn't answer. Seeing a falling leaf, he didn't ask why it fell, but wondered, does the leaf know it's falling? When he saw the moon drifting over the lake, he whispered, is the moon sad when separated by the ripples? Those questions, as light as wind, as vague as smoke, left adults unable to answer. They gradually judged him a daydreamer, unrealistic, and urged him to focus on school, work, and growing up. But he didn't stop. When he was a bit older, he heard about a meditation master on the mountain, rumored to answer questions no one could. The boy decided to find him, carrying within him a strange question. What is the sound of one hand clapping? The master wasn't old as people said. He had a calm demeanor, bright eyes, and each step seemed grounded. When he heard the boy, he neither laughed nor lectured. He just looked far toward the forest behind the temple, where the wind bent the bamboo grove. Then he invited the boy to stay. No promise of an answer, no affirmation. The boy stayed. Day after day he did small chores at the temple, fetching water, chopping wood, sweeping the courtyard, cooking rice. Whenever he got the chance, he came to the master and repeated the question, Master, what is the sound of one hand clapping? But the master never answered. One day, he drew a circle in the sand. Another day, he flipped over a bowl then walked away. Another day, he closed his eyes and slept at noon while the boy waited for an answer. At first, the boy felt disappointed, but gradually, he learned not to wait anymore. Instead of searching for an answer, he began to live with the question. It sat beside him like a silent friend. When he fetched water, the question followed the flow. When he swept leaves, it floated within each sweep of the broom. When he sat under the moon, it quietly remained, needing no words, no conclusion. And then one day, as he sat on the porch, watching the plum blossoms open, he suddenly laughed, a very soft laugh, as if he himself didn't expect what just happened. No answer appeared, no words in his head, but he felt the question dissolve, like a dewdrop melting under morning sun, and in its place, there was a profound silence, not emptiness, but a boundless space, without edges or meanings, just pure being without explanation. He ran to the master, said nothing, only bowed deeply. The master looked at him and nodded slightly, and for the first time asked back, "Have you heard?" The boy replied, "Master, I heard nothing, but I no longer need to hear." And in that answer, the master saw clearly. The young student had stepped through the silent door, the door of not knowing, of not needing to know. Because in Zen, some questions are not to be answered, but to dissolve the craving for answers. Just like the sound of one hand clapping, it cannot be heard by the ear, understood by the mind, analyzed by reason. It is the silence between all sounds, the life within all concepts, the essence of stillness from which all noise is born and to which it returns. When the mind no longer seeks, when the intellect no longer demands, only then can one truly hear. Later, when the boy left the meditation hall, he was a grown man. No one called him the daydreamer anymore. They called him a very quiet person, someone who could sit for hours without speaking, yet made those opposite him feel understood. He no longer asked the old questions, not because he lost curiosity, but because he realized Not everything needs an answer. Some things need only to be lived with, listened to, breathed with, and then they will dissolve into you like orchid fragrance in the breeze. And sometimes, when someone comes to him, full of confused questions, he says nothing, just offers a hand, no clap, no movement, no sound, but in the seeker's heart, they suddenly hear something very still, very wide, very deep. And if today you carry a question about life, about people, about yourself, try living with it. Instead of forcing an end to it, let it walk beside you like a companion. No demands, no pressure, no need to answer immediately. Perhaps one day, when you're cooking, or washing your hands, or walking during the late afternoon, that question will fall away like a petal. Not because you found the answer, but because you no longer need it. And in that moment, just then, you will hear the sound of one hand clapping. Later in life, the boy who once carried that question up the mountain, who once knocked on a Zen master's door in search of a sound that could not be heard, lived the rest of his days like someone who carried nothing, left nothing behind, like a footprint in the sand, washed away by the waves before it had a chance to settle. He never became a famous teacher. He never built his own retreat for seekers. He simply lived, as if life did not need any embellishment. Each morning, he brewed a simple pot of tea, placed it on the porch, and silently watched sunlight filter through the branches. Then he walked barefoot into the garden, touched the soil, inhaled the scent of grass, listened to the cicadas, the wind, and even the silence. He no longer worried whether others could understand what he had once experienced. Because he knew, Zen is not something to be shared like an answer. It is a space. Only when someone becomes quiet enough to enter can they truly hear it. Just as he once had. Someone once asked, "Why is the sound of one hand clapping a Zen question?" The answer does not lie in any explanation. It has nothing to do with logic, is not aimed at the intellect, and is not merely a metaphor. It is a key, not to open any specific door, but to shatter the idea that every question must have an answer. It is a sharp blade that cuts through the habit of grasping, of defining, of trying to fit everything into a safe frame of thought. Because in this life, the more we try to understand certain things, the further we drift from them. Like the wind, like the taste of tea, like the gaze a mother gives her child. If we ask, "What does it mean?" we can no longer feel it. The sound of one hand clapping, then, is not a paradox, it is an invitation. An invitation to let go of the need to understand, and instead begin to live fully. And maybe, just like him, you too have carried a question. Maybe it is, "Who am I? What should I do with this life? Why can't I feel peace?" Or, "When will I finally be okay?" These questions may have stayed with you for years, glowing faintly like an ember beneath ashes, not burning, but never going out. You have asked others, read books, meditated, tried to analyze everything, and at times, it may have felt like you were close to the answer. But each time you reached out, it slipped further away, not because you were ignorant, not because life is too complex, but because you were using the wrong approach. You were walking into the daytime holding a torch. But Zen is like the quiet moon, it only appears when you put down your torch. When you let darkness settle in, when the light does not come from you, but from what already is. That is why, for a long time, he stopped talking to anyone about Zen. Not because he wanted to keep it secret, but because he understood that whatever is spoken is no longer Zen. He just lived, with full presence. In each movement, each glance, each gentle smile. One time, a woman who had lost her child came to him. Not because she had heard he was enlightened, but simply because someone said, "He knows how to be silent." She came and sat across from him under a summer tree. They said nothing for an entire hour. Neither did he. But when she left, tears quietly falling, her heart was somehow lighter. Because for the first time, someone had not tried to comfort her, not tried to teach her, not tried to take her pain away, just simply been there. Fully, unconditionally, and in that complete presence. Her pain no longer needed to be erased, it became a part of life. Like a fallen leaf nourishing the soil. And then, as the years passed, his hair turned white, his eyes grew calmer, but his steps remained as light as mist. On a late autumn day, when golden leaves covered the narrow paths around his home, he sat alone on his porch, holding a fallen leaf in one hand. The wind passed by, so gently it seemed to touch nothing. But he knew, the wind was saying something. Not in words, not in thoughts, just in the presence of the ungraspable. He softly closed his eyes. And within him arose a sound, not from outside, not from inside, but from the space in between. A place with no boundary, where there is no questioner, no one to answer, and not even a question. And that was the moment he truly heard. Not a clap, not silence, but the dissolution of both. And if you are still listening to this story, maybe you have already sensed that you do not need to understand everything to live fully. You do not need to have an answer to feel peace. You do not need to reach something great to feel whole. You only need to pause. Sit down, hear a sound with no noise. See a form with no shape. Feel a hand that never touches. And then, in one unforced moment, you will hear the sound of one hand clapping. On the final night of winter, when the snow had stopped falling but the earth was still damp and cold, the boy from long ago, now an old man, lived alone in a deep valley, where there were no cars, no street lights, only the stream, the moon, and occasionally the wind brushing across the roof. He lived as if slowly merging with nature, leaving no trace, keeping no past. Each morning, he boiled water, made tea, and watched the sun rise from behind the mountain. Each night, he turned off his light very early, not out of weariness, but because there was nothing left that needed to be seen. In his light sleeps, he often dreamed of a child, face unknown, name unknown, only that the child always walked beside him, saying nothing, asking for nothing, only sometimes lifting a hand and placing it gently in the wind. Sometimes he would wake, his hand still hovering in the air, as if trying to grasp a sound that had never been made. He told no one of these dreams, not because they were secret, but because he knew, if something must be spoken, it means the listener is not yet ready. And when someone is not still enough to listen, words only become obstacles. Like the sound of one hand clapping, the more you strain to hear, the less you can. But if you stay with someone like that long enough, living together, breathing together, cooking, chopping wood, sitting still for no reason, then maybe, one unexpected moment, you will hear it, not with your ears, but with your heart. A heart that has stopped searching, stopped demanding, stopped trying to understand. Then, on a spring day, when peach blossoms had just begun to bloom along the cliffs. He passed away quietly, like a leaf falling without a sound. The villagers only realized when no smoke rose from his chimney. They came, knocked on his door, and found him sitting silently at the table, as if asleep, one hand resting on a plum blossom branch. No note left behind, no last words, no will. But on the table, there was a dry ring of tea in the shape of a crescent, like a frozen echo. Like a sound that had never been made. The people did not understand. They fell silent. But one boy, the neighbor's child whom the old man once taught to brew tea, stood still for a long time. Then quietly closed his eyes. And in that moment, though no one knew why, the boy gently smiled. That smile, perhaps it was the only sound left from an entire life of silence. And from then on, the villagers no longer called him the hermit. They began to call him the one who listens to what is not said. His home was left untouched. No one cleaned it, no one turned it into a shrine. They just left everything as it was, the tea stain on the table, the old robe hanging by the door, the worn straw mat, and the withered plum blossom branch. Because some presences, when they leave, remain entirely, as if they never left at all. Like the sound of one hand clapping, not heard, yet stirring the hearts of all who are quiet enough to feel it. And if there has ever been a moment in your life, just one moment, when you paused in the middle of the chaos, felt your heart grow still, neither happy nor sad, needing nothing, lacking nothing, then cherish that moment, because maybe, in that instant, you heard what you had spent your whole life searching for. Not through words, not through ideas, but through your own pure presence. And who knows, that might have been the sound of one hand clapping. On a mist-covered path, two young Zen monks were walking back to their monastery after a long pilgrimage. It was an autumn morning, the fields still flooded, and the birds quiet, as if asleep in the pale white sky. They walked beside each other in silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because through long days of practice, they had learned to let things pass like clouds, unheld, unexplained, unforced into words. They reached a stream, the water swollen from the night's rain. The current swift, the muddy flow having erased the stepping stones that once formed a crossing. At the riverbank stood a young woman in a white silk dress. Her face distraught, she looked at the two monks, then bowed her head and softly said, "Please help me cross. I cannot do it alone." The younger monk, still strict in following the precepts, turned away and avoided her gaze. The elder monk said nothing. He simply bent down, gently lifted the woman into his arms, and stepped into the stream. His steps were steady, as if the water could not shake him. The current rose to his waist, flowing fast, but he walked on, holding her as if holding a leaf, not hurried, not hesitant. When they reached the other side, he set her down, bowed in farewell, and continued walking, as if it were just one of countless small things in a day. The woman bowed deeply in gratitude, eyes brimming with tears, but he had already turned away. The younger monk followed behind, his face tense, saying nothing the entire way, but his steps grew heavier, like he was carrying a stone in his chest. They passed through silent forests, over golden grass hills, past humble cottages tucked in the mist. By dusk, as the sky turned purple and birds returned to their nests, The younger monk could no longer hold it in. He stopped, turned to the elder, his eyes filled with distress. "Why did you do that? We are keepers of the pure precepts. You touched a woman, you carried her across the river. How can you act like it never happened?" The elder stopped walking. He looked at his companion with eyes soft as the evening breeze and gently replied, "I set her down at the riverbank this morning. Why are you still carrying her now?" That sentence was not loud, not sharp, carried no blame, but it dropped into the younger monk's heart like a pebble in a pond, no splash, but ripples that ran deep. He stood still. All his rules, ideals, things he once thought were right, suddenly felt light as air. He realized he had not truly lived that moment. He had let the rules in his head cloud his heart. The one he accused of breaking the precepts had let go of all attachment right after the compassionate act. But he, who had not touched anyone, carried that woman's image in his mind all day. And in that moment, he understood, keeping the precepts is not just about actions, but about not clinging to them. Letting go does not mean avoiding. It means acting, then releasing. True purity is not in the body, but in the mind. A mind that carries nothing, that is freedom. From that day forward, the young monk began to relearn how to live, not as someone clinging to rules, but as someone who listens to his heart, so that every action, every word, every silence comes from awareness, not fear of breaking rules. He grew softer, not weak, but no longer rigid. He came to see that compassion has no fixed form. Sometimes it is a glance, sometimes a bowl of rice, sometimes a hug, and sometimes it is carrying someone across a river and leaving them there. Not holding on, not clinging, not explaining, and in living that way, he felt lighter than ever before. The things that once made him angry, judgmental, argumentative, no longer mattered, because he understood. Everyone is carrying a woman by the river in their heart. Some carry a grudge, some a past mistake, some an unfulfilled dream, but the pain does not come from the woman. It comes from never setting her down. And so, whenever he met someone burdened, he would not advise them to let go, nor teach them any doctrine. He would simply ask, gently, "The woman you are carrying, is it time to set her down?" Not everyone understood the question, but for those who did, no other words were needed. Many years after the day he carried the woman across the river, that young monk had become a respected teacher, abbot of a small monastery on the mountain, where only the sound of pine trees, flowing streams, and quiet footsteps of seekers filled the air. But even with the passing of time, the image of that stream, the face of that woman, and his elder brother's words remained vivid in his heart, like a silent sutra. Not because he could not forget, but because that story became an endless lesson, each time he recalled it. It deepened, widened, and calmed him further. He once believed he had understood it instantly. But the more he lived, the more he realized, understanding is not a destination, but a flow. Every day of meditation, each time he swept the courtyard, brewed tea, walked barefoot on cold earth, he discovered another layer of what he thought he already knew. One day, a young novice in the temple asked him, "Master, is there something you've done that you can never forget?" He looked at the boy, did not answer right away. He stood, went out to the garden, picked up a fallen leaf, returned, and placed it in the novice's palm, then softly said, Not because that leaf once hung on a tree, but because the wind once carried it. The novice did not understand, but the master did not need him to. He knew, some seeds only need to be planted in someone's heart. Then let the wind, the sun and time do the rest. Just as he himself, back then, carried that woman across the river, thinking it was just a small act. But it became a stream that forever flowed through his consciousness, wearing away his rigid shell, softening his dryness, and tenderizing his heart over time. He came to see that in monastic life, and in ordinary life, suffering does not come from what we have done, but from what we refuse to let go. Some hold on to a hurtful word from 10 years ago. Some cling to the gaze of someone who left. Some carry a mistake they can no longer remember in detail. Just the ache it left behind. All of those things, if looked at closely, are the woman by the river. No one asked you to carry them, but you hold on. No one forbids you to put them down, but you do not know how. And so, you walk through days and years with a burdened gait. Your soul always tired, only because you do not know you are carrying something you no longer need. There was another time, when a middle-aged woman came to see the Zen master in a state of confusion. She spoke of her former husband who had betrayed her and left, leaving a wound so deep that she had not been able to trust anyone for over 20 years. She said, "I cannot forgive him, not because he's still around, but because he's still inside me. Like a shadow. I do not know how to make him disappear." The Zen master silently poured tea, then placed the cup in front of her. He did not explain forgiveness. He offered no comfort. He simply asked, "Do you know where you are sitting right now?" She looked confused. He continued, "You are on this side of the river, but in your heart, you are still on the other side." And then, after a long pause, her tears began to fall, not from sadness, but because she realized she had crossed the river long ago, yet had carried his image with her as if he were still standing at the edge of the water. In that moment, for the first time, she understood what it meant to set something down, not to forgive, not to erase, just to stop carrying it. That Zen master, until the end of his life, never gave long Dharma talks, never wrote books, never organized rituals or grand ceremonies. But for some, just sitting with him one afternoon, listening to the wind passing through the bamboo, watching him slowly lift a cup of water, was enough to calm their hearts. They did not understand why, but they knew there was something in his presence, so light, so clear, so real, and perhaps, it was because he had once truly let go, not just of the woman, but of the self that wanted to be right, wanted to keep the precepts, wanted to be recognized as pure. When he released that, he became an open door, so that others could see they too could let go. As simply as exhaling. And if you, hearing this now, suddenly feel something stir in your heart, if you have been carrying something for years and cannot seem to release it, remember this. It may not be because it is too heavy, but because you have never stopped to ask, "Why am I still carrying this?" And maybe it is time to set it down. You do not need to cross a river. You do not need someone to carry you. You do not need a ritual. You just need to realize you are already on this side. And what you need to let go of is no longer there. Sometime later, as the Zen master sat beneath the ancient tree in the monastery courtyard, he heard the softest of footsteps approaching. It was a young novice, his face still youthful. eyes bright but carrying the weariness of a restless mind. The boy sat beside him in silence for a while, then whispered, "I cannot meditate. Every time I sit down, I remember my mother. She left me at the temple when I was little. I know she could not raise me, but I still feel sad. And I feel terrible for still thinking about it all the time." The Zen master said nothing. He pulled from his sleeve an old cloth, handing it to the novice. He said, "Take this cloth and wash it. But when you are done, do not bring it back to me. Let the wind dry it. Then place it on the grass behind the mountain." The novice did not understand, but he did as instructed. The next day, he returned and asked, "Master, I did as you said, but why was I not to return the cloth to you?" The Zen master replied, "Because some things, once done, do not need to be carried anymore. That cloth, once it has been washed, once it is clean, let it stay clean. If you keep taking it back and forth, wiping your hands and face, getting it dirty and washing it again, it will never be at peace." The novice went silent. In a very brief moment, his heart exhaled, as if what he had been carrying all this time had just been gently placed down by someone. Not with words of comfort, not with explanation, just with a simple act, a cloth washed, then left behind. And he understood. Memory is the same. The more we try to scrub it clean, the more stained it becomes. Only when we know how to leave it behind, not to discard it, not to deny it, but to let it rest, can we truly move forward without carrying anything. From that day on, the novice no longer struggled each time he meditated, not because he forgot his mother, but because he no longer fought the memory of her. He let it sit beside him, like a quiet companion. Sometimes it came close, sometimes it drifted away, but no one had to win, no one had to leave. And in that companionship, he grew, not as someone without wounds, but as someone who had learned how to live with his wounds without letting them bleed again. Years passed, and the small monastery remained quiet as always. The Zen master grew old, his steps slower than before. But each morning he still walked behind the mountain, to the little grassy field, and there he would find cloths, freshly washed, gently placed on the grass, left behind without a trace. Once, he stood there for a long time. In the early wind, dozens of white cloths fluttered like words never spoken, not laid out to dry, but as if returning something clean to the earth and sky. No one told anyone to do this, but perhaps something had quietly spread from him, from that old story, from his kind eyes, from the way he sat in stillness, like the fragrance of tea that does not need wind to be smelled. People had begun to learn how to set things down on their own. And perhaps, one day, you too will find a cloth in your heart, a memory, a person, something from long ago. You do not need to throw it away. You do not need to forget. Just wash it, with mindfulness, with understanding, with the hand of forgiveness, and place it somewhere within yourself. Do not look back. Do not hope it disappears. Just let it be, like a part of your life that has passed, been cleaned, and come to rest. And then, in the most ordinary moment, while walking down the street, or washing your hands, or sipping water, you may suddenly feel lighter. Not because of anything grand, but because you are no longer carrying anyone, no longer straining to hold onto anything. At that moment, you will understand, carrying someone across the river never made you heavy. What kept you from moving on was not knowing how to set them down afterward. And letting go. Sometimes it is simply a washed cloth, left in peace. 8 stories, 8 fragments of a mirror, not reflecting perfect images, but honest slices of people once confused, once lost, once wounded on the path back to themselves. Somewhere in these stories, maybe you see yourself, the girl by the river in despair, needing to be carried through a bend in life, the scholar yearning for recognition but unable to hold even a full cup of tea, the temple visitor begging for light without seeing the flame already lit in their heart. Maybe you once resented like the misunderstood girl, wasted like Taesui who abandoned a priceless spiritual meal over petty pride, or chased after things that seemed important, only to look back one day and realize how far you had strayed from yourself. But what matters is not how far you've gone, not what you've lost, not how many mistakes you've made, but whether you are willing to return. Because the moment you pause, release, and grow still, is also the moment you begin again. Life does not ask you to be perfect. It only asks that you be truly present. Like a leaf that does not need to understand why it falls, it only needs to fall fully into that moment, trusting that the earth will receive it. Like a stream that does not ask where it is going, it simply flows. Gently, honestly, every breath you take, every moment of awareness you live, is a moment you are born again. Not from the beginning, but from deep within, from a place where there are no memories, no identity, no burden of having to be someone. And sometimes, just a simple phrase, a gentle glance, a small act that seems to mean nothing, can open a door to peace. Like the words of Zen master Hakuin. Is that so? A short sentence? Without explanation, without argument, demanding no understanding, yet enough to let all worries fall away. As light as the evening dew. If you have come this far, it means a seed has already been planted in you, a seed of return. It does not matter where you are in life. It does not matter how much you are hurting, or how many times you have been broken, as long as you can still listen. Still pause for a moment. Then peace is still here. Still waiting for you on this side of the river. Not as a destination, but as something you have always carried, just never realized. Thank you for walking with me through this quiet journey. Thank you for listening, not just with your ears, but with your heart, a heart that, even with its patches and tears, still holds enough gentleness to pause, to understand, and to forgive itself. If these stories have touched you, even just a little, then let that touch continue to live. Maybe through a softer smile with someone you love, a quiet pause before bedtime, a cup of tea you pour slowly for yourself each morning, or simply by holding this lightness in your heart, like picking up a dry leaf, not because it is still fresh, but because you see the beauty in its stillness. And if you wish to keep joining me on journeys like this, journeys without names, without maps, requiring only an open heart and a mind ready to return, then please subscribe to the channel. Not because I need another follower, but because I believe, somewhere in each of us, there is a part longing to be heard, to be accompanied, to be healed. Share this video with anyone you think might also need a little peace. And who knows, maybe just one small story is enough to bring a little light to someone who has lost their way. I will see you again in another video, another evening, another moment, where we sit down together once more, breathe gently, and listen to the bells that ring without sound. yet echo in the heart.